When Denis Villeneuve's adaptation came out in 2021, it was the first time Dune had been on the big screen in almost 40 years. But there were still translations of the book to screen. The Sci-Fi Channel released two 3-episode miniseries. The first covered the events of Dune, while the second combined the two follow-up novels, Dune Messiah and Children of Dune. People used to think Dune couldn't be adapted to film, and now I want to know what it looks like as early 2000s television. Let's do this. What up, Internet? 2000 sci-fi is a unique experience. We weren't at the point where we could get something Star Wars-esque, but a solid production with a good enough budget looked good. It was solid. Think about stuff like Stargate Atlantis or Warehouse 13. Things were a little bright and glossy, especially the CGI, but they still delivered. The outlier seems to have been Battlestar Galactica, a show that, for its time, feels very different from its contemporaries, probably part of why it seems to have had the longest life beyond its original run. That said, it has made me wonder how the Dune miniseries would hold up now. I've got the taste of Lynch's film in my mouth, and I want to know if watching this would cover it up. Yes, honestly, Frank Herbert's Dune really impressed me. The 3-hour-and-a-half episodes gave the story so much more room to breathe than the 84 film. The first episode only covers up to the Harkonnen attack, leaving us with plenty of time to get the vibe of these characters. And then again, the second episode is all just Paul training with the Fremen, and it's not even all of that. We don't even get to the worm stuff there. I especially appreciate in the first episode, there is a little scene of the Duke giving flowers to Lady Jessica when she arrives on Arrakis, and it's a sweet reminder that they are in love. There's bits like Gurney and Paul having a short conversation that I really enjoy in this one. Just these little moments that deepen the relationship that Lynch's take just didn't have the room for. It makes you wonder what was cut from that film. I also like the way they portrayed that House Atreides really did feel like a smart and likable organization early on. That is a major point to them that needs expressing. It's so good. But despite all of its good, I do think that there is some real drag to it. Writer-director John Harrison wanted to be as faithful to the novel as possible, and while that did give a lot to the miniseries, it also gave us moments that felt too long or could have been cut. That said, I don't think I would call any of that a deal breaker here, because the good by far outweighs the bad. I just hate that the episodes feel like they have a book's pace, and I don't know if you've heard this, books are different than TV. What a dumb joke. I see why they added a subplot for the princess in this, making her more of a character at play, being as she becomes more important later on, but her scenes all in all were a mixed bag of hits and misses. It does feel a bit running its wheels in a sort of way. While on the topic of negatives, I do wish things like the siege in episode 1 had a little more to it. It felt a bit rushed. The action is an element that really reminds you that this is a show from its era. Not a bad thing per se, it's just the truth. They couldn't go as hard as I'm sure they would have liked. The hand-to-hand stuff in episode 2 is an example though where the action is actually really good. It's during Paul joining the Fremen, and it's a really good sequence. I really enjoyed it. That's really where their strengths lie more. Another thing worth mentioning is the CGI. While it is a bit dated now, I think it is really great within the context of its era. That first worm attack in particular, damn dude. I think the biggest plus of the series by far is Vittorio Storaro. Getting the cinematographer of Apocalypse Now really elevates the visuals. Because while the miniseries still has the lighting style you'd expect from the networks in the 2000s and the sets and all that, he really elevates it all into an art form. The second biggest asset is William Hurt as the Duke. A lot of the actors are doing a good job in this, but he brings the role a casual likability that I really appreciate and might even prefer him to Oscar Isaac in Villeneuve's version, which is a big statement if you know me. I'm sorry, Oscar, you're still the hottest Duke. And while I'm trying not to bring up other adaptations too much, letting each version exist on its own, I do need to bring up a point of criticism that Villeneuve's Dune gets, because I think it's much worse here. The Fremen in the book draw heavy inspiration from Arabic culture. A lot of discussion has been had that Dune is essentially stealing their culture for aesthetics. With Denis' version, the cast doesn't have any Middle Eastern people in the roles, instead going for just non-white skinned actors, with Zendaya being black and Javier Bardem being Spanish as the major examples. And that is an extremely valid critique. And even though the characters aren't Middle Eastern, they're Fremen, there are still plenty of important discussions around it being led by people much more well with the Fremen, but all roles. While I have been enjoying these different takes on Dune, hearing people call white guys Dr. Yue sucks every time. In this miniseries, for example, they separate the different cultures by costuming, color schemes, and vague accent work, while only ever putting white people on screen. It is honestly really frustrating knowing the discourse around the current version of Dune, while this just exists. I had to get that off my chest. It's been hanging over my head while watching this otherwise very enjoyable miniseries. Okay. After the success of Dune, the Sci-Fi Channel quickly greenlit a follow-up combining the next two Herbert novels, Dune Messiah and Children of Dune, and that became its own 3-episode miniseries that was also written but not directed by John Harrison. I was really curious about this because while the first miniseries did drag a bit, it did a much better job with covering everything in the book than a single film could. So would combining the next 2 books make them feel rushed, give it that weird, uncomfortable pacing, or would 3-episode structure still be able to accommodate all of it? Answering that question is why this video isn't done yet. Susan Sarandon is in this. Like, I knew that from my early research, but I had forgotten, so it was still kind of a great surprise. I will say, her performance is exactly right for this. She brings a theatricality to the role while never going into full-on hamming it up. Perfect for the plotting villain in a melodramatic story like this. So the first episode only covers Dune Messiah, and it does it in a fairly compelling way. Most of the episode is just dialogue scenes, so it feels a little low energy, but none of the individual scenes run on as long as some in the first series did. I think if there were a few more sequences that could have broken up these scenes, like the wonderful montage near the end, it could have been even better, because it feels at times like a vehicle for plot, and I think that would fix that. Still, it is a good and compelling start. The CGI in this series bothered me a little more than the predecessor, but not because it was worse per se, but because there was more of it, drawing more attention to it. That you see the cracks when you're up close. That said, it still has that charm to it of the era. But even with that CGI, I think the cinematography is even better here. Done by a cinematographer I had never heard of stepping into the giant shoes of Storaro, Arthur Reinhardt brings a much more subtle, grounded look to the whole thing, while still having some great, compelling lighting throughout. So the second episode picks up its pace after the first. The scene where Lady Jessica arrives has a great energy to it, even before the assassination attempt, and the filmmaking brings a lot of life to it. It also has plenty of emotional moments, giving more balance to the serious discussions pushing the plot forward. Episode 2 overall has a lot more opportunities for great moments, pushing things forward from the first. Then that continues in the third, with some more political dealings feeling like a culmination of everything that they were doing here. And honestly, I really do appreciate that each series builds off each other, episode to episode, getting better as it goes. I love witnessing growth in art. Speaking of growth, it's fun watching an early James McAvoy role. While he's not bad in this, he has gotten a lot better as a performer in his later work. Watch Filth. Lastly, I just want to say I love the Baron in this. While the performance was really good in the original miniseries, in this, I really appreciate the dynamic given, especially being that I'm less familiar with what goes on past the first Dune book. So seeing this and what they got to do camera-wise and directing wise, was a lot of fun, and I appreciate what they had going on there. And it felt like a exciting new flavor to Dune as someone who has, again, mainly just consumed the first part of the story multiple times. Overall, these iterations were dope. Despite not having seen them before, I really felt a sense of nostalgia while watching them. It's crazy, but I absolutely would have been super into this stuff if I had come across it at the time. This was absolutely my shit back then. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know your thoughts on this take of Dune in the comments below. And until next time, have a good one.